Good evening, folks. Is that too loud? Welcome. My name is Brian Piper. I'm the Freeman family curator of photographs, prints, and drawings here at NOMA. And on behalf of NOMA, I want to thank you for coming out for our artist lecture with Ben Don this evening. I also want to thank Dell and Ginger Hall, whose photography fund made the exhibition possible, as well as the A. Charlotte Man and Joshua Mann Paylett Endowment. Ben Don's work is on view upstairs as part of Photogenic photographs from the collection of Cherye R and James F. Pierce. And after the talk, please feel free to head upstairs and check out the exhibition. And if you haven't seen Ben's work, you'll find it on view in the Templeman Gallery under a protective curtain. Please put the curtain back down when you're done checking it out. It is my honor tonight to introduce Mr. Ben Don, whose work is on view. After the talk, there will be some time for question and answer, and then there will be a book signing of his really marvelous monograph on view. His monograph will be in the bookstore down the hall across the elevator lobby. Ben Don was born in Vietnam and immigrated to the United States with his parents in 1979. He earned a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Photography from San Jose State University, where he now teaches. And he also holds a Master of Fine Arts from Stanford University. Early in his career, Ben developed a process of printing photographs using chlorophyll directly on the leaves of plants, so it looks like these photographs are embedded in the plants themselves. More recently, he has turned towards 19th century processes, even teaching himself how to make daguerreotypes, to make landscape photographs that are to continue to interrogate ideas like memory, place, and identity. In 2010, he won a Eureka Fellowship from the Fleischacker Foundation, and in 2012, he was included in the 18th Biennale of Sydney, Australia. Ben has had solo exhibitions at the Louisiana State Museum here in New Orleans, at the Phillips Museum of Art at Franklin Marshall College, and at Taubman Museum of Art in Roanoke, Virginia. His work is in countless institutional permanent collections, including the National Gallery of Art, San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, the MFA Boston, and the George Eastman Museum in Rochester, New York. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Ben Don.
Thank you, Brian, for the nice introduction. I just want to say, I don't know, I'm nervous because I'm shaking, but it's also cold in here, so I'm also shaking for that reason. So I apologize if my voice tremor a little bit. But yeah, thank you so much for having me and coming out on a Wednesday evening just to hear me talk. And please always invite your friends and family for the next artist talk. It's really meaningful for us to be able just to, we have the work on the wall, but then we can also, we're here in person, we're the makers, to present the work to the community here. So I also want to mention, some of my work deals with imageries of war. So just keep that in mind. That's a sensitive subject for you. Okay. So this first slide is I'm trying to summarize sort of my experience growing up as a child, as a refugee child of war. I was, as mentioned, I was born in Vietnam. I came here in the 1980s as what you might know as a boat people. And so those pictures on the left there, the black and white photograph, is my parents holding my sibling and me. And then the picture in the background there, that's a photograph that came out of the war, sort of experience of civilians. And then when I was growing up, as a kid, I worked at my father's TV repair shop. So I was surrounded with a lot of media. I had a lot of TVs on. As we fixed TV, got to let them run for a couple hours. So to pass the time, I was watching a lot of Vietnam War movies. It just happened to come through the screen, and my parents never really talked about the Vietnam War. It was something like they expect I kind of figured out on my own in a way. And I I think a lot for them because, what they experienced was sort of, they didn't want to pass that trauma or the burden down to, the second generation. But in ways, they by being silent, I think they do pass on somehow. I think that's a common experience among a lot of refugees here in this country. So in 1999, I visited Vietnam for the first time. And it was a really emotional trip for me because I wanted to understand Vietnam as a country and not as a war topic. So I traveled the country with a film camera, a Mamiya 7, for any photographers out there who want to know. And it was also the first time I met my grandparents and relatives who stayed behind to watch, the house when we were gone. There's a lot of photographs from the series, but I'm just showing you a few for tonight. Like in Vietnam, the Vietnamese people believe that your ancestor will watch over your rice paddies for you. So you would see a situation where, this is rice paddy and also cemeteries are embedded into the same location here. And of course, even though I was trying to unearth the Vietnam War, it wasn't hard to find remnants of the war throughout the landscape. And for example, here at a museum called the War Memorial Museum in Ho Chi Minh City, there was an installation of a camera where the bullet went through the camera and injured the photographer in this picture here. So when I got back to the U.S., I was thinking about tackling the subject of the Vietnam War in a body of work. I wanted to, it was also my BFA thesis work, so I had to basically do something to graduate. And when I was just standing in my mother's garden, I was just thinking back to my trip and it's really hard to explain how creativity works, but I was standing in her garden and I was just thinking about, is it possible to put an image of the Vietnam War onto tropical plants, onto leaves, Because so much of the war when I was in Vietnam and also growing up watching imageries of war was so tropical, the green foliages, And that was also my introduction to landscape. So it was, I was thinking of landscape and war as going hand in hand, And as we all know here, you think about Civil War photography, all that, early landscape photographs were about war in ways. So, the work I have up on the wall here, it's about putting image onto leaves by using the natural chlorophyll color within the leaf by bleaching the color out in the sun. And it was surprisingly, I also found out that this process, which I call chlorophyll printing, was also practiced in the 18th and 19th century. And this is an illustration here of a person named Hippolyte Bayard Sr. So if you're familiar with photography, Hippolyte Bayard Jr. invented a photographic process, but he wasn't given credit by the French government. So he staged himself as a drowned man. I think some of you might know that picture. So it was considered the first sort of staged photograph. It's a fake picture, like many fake pictures we see today. But it was, for me, his story was more interesting because his father harvests peach, and every year his father would give his friends and family a basket of fruit, and inside that basket was a special peach with his signature on it. So how he got his signature on the peach was that right before the peach was about to ripe, he will almost tape, some form of adhesive back then, a signature of his name onto the skin of the peach. In other readings, I read that he actually wrapped the peach with the leaves around the peach, and then he'll cut into one of the leaf and cut out a stencil. And I also did try that a couple of years ago. I actually planted a peach tree, and you can see even just in this direct process with just 2 leaves blocking that sunlight, that part of the peach doesn't change color, you know. So, you know, I mean, photosynthesis is all around us, you know, we won't be here without photosynthesis, you know, with plants supplying this planet with oxygen. So with that idea, I started this body of work called Immortality, the Remnants of the Vietnam-American War. And why immortality is because, you know, the idea of the war living on, and of course, remnants is a trace of the war. And the word Vietnam and American War, because in Vietnam they call it the American War, while here we call it the Vietnam War. And, you know, I was thinking about all these imageries that I witnessed growing up and looking through the archives of the Vietnam War. For example, like the Buddhist monk Thich Quang Duc, who set himself on fire to protest the oppression of the Buddhist community by the Catholic regimes who ruled South Vietnam at the time. And then like a picture like this, you know, with all that smoke coming out of his body, I was thinking about, you know, again, the elements within our body itself and how we're just made of atoms. And these atoms, they exist in the beginning of time. And I always imagine, you know, if we're able to look at every atom that's composed of our bodies, of, you know, the sperm here, all these atoms carry history within them, you know, the histories to the beginning of the universe. You might also be familiar with Agent Orange, you know, which was used during the Vietnam War to defoliate the jungle so that the enemy couldn't hide. But within Agent Orange, which is a herbicide, is contain a compound called dioxin. And dioxin will cause sort of birth defects in the life form because it actually, how it works is actually, it increased the cell division of plants and also life form. And then it multiplied so fast that the plants would die within several days, you know. So when I was growing up, I would find imageries of kids with deformed limbs, and I would ask my mother, oh, what's wrong with these kids? And she would say they have the Orange disease. And then in my imagination that they went to war and came back from war with missing limbs, but in actuality, the war was sort of born inside of their bodies through the compound of dioxin. So, like in this project, I was really thinking about, you know, if the plants could witness these events, you know, what would they remember, and what could they teach us? I'll show you several installations of bodies of work I've done, you know, throughout my career so far. This is an exhibit at Mills College Art Museum, and it's called Collecting Memories. And I think about, you know, memories, memories as things that we could collect. We could collect them through photographs, but we could also collect them through objects. And how, you know, that collecting could also inspire us to make art, you know, to respond in ways. And of course, as an artist, I make things. So in this installation here is called Military Foliage, and printed on each of these leaves are different camouflage patterns from different military organizations. And, you know, I was thinking about, you know, if there was like no end to war, will plants, you know, will evolve into the patterns of war in a way to sort of like protect themselves from the humans taking over their habitat. And we also know that, you know, soldiers wear camouflage patterns within the landscape so then they can hide within the landscape. So it's kind of you know, haunting to see and also think that they're also becoming part of our landscape. You know, they might not be able to walk out of it. And so the next gallery has artifacts that I collected in my research. And in a lot of projects, when I'm working on projects, I love the research part of it because you know you just don't know what you're gonna find, where you're gonna go with the work, and how like collecting the things to also inform the body work. So these tables are found photographs. They're Life magazine imageries that I appropriated within the chlorophyll prints. And I also, as a photographer, I travel and I also make pictures. So I, visit Southeast Asia many times and traveled out the country and photographed the remnants of the war. For example, like this bomb crater in Laos. And what also in Laos, they collect a lot of these unexplosive bombs that were dropped. Majority by, of course, by United States, and a lot of these materials are recyclable, and they're melted down and shipped through the economy in ways, and they become cars and stuff, and they find their ways back into our consumer culture. And I always thought that was so fascinating that you might be using an object that was once something else, in a different time, different life. I also read accounts that during the Vietnam War, in the book by Nick Turse called Kill Anything That Moves, where he calculated the amount of ammunition and power that was used during that time period. It was about 15 years of war, that he equated to 640 atomic bomb exploding, within that area. So imagine the amount of power that was unleashed during the war. And then this is in the perfume pagoda in Hue in central Vietnam, is the car that transported the Buddhist monk to Saigon, and where this event happened here. So that now becomes a relic within the perfume pagoda. And of course, photographs like this really interest me too. For example, this one here by Larry Barrows called Four Marines Recover the Bodies of a Comrade Under Fire, 1966. And I was thinking about, bodily fluid, like sweats and blood becoming part of those grassy rice sort of feel in a ways, and how they echo. And of course, I was thinking of course also Walt Whitman, who did a lot of writing about the Civil War, and he helped a lot of soldiers during the time period, volunteering at a hospital. I want to show you another body work called The Faces of the American Dead in Vietnam, When We Stow. And this is called, in Life magazine on June 27, 1969, published this article of American soldiers who died in the Vietnam War. So basically they took it in like an ordinary week during this 15-year war and published the portraits of these soldiers who were killed. So then, I was very fascinated with this Life magazine issue, because it was like this yearbook, of these faces. And as I was thinking about this Life magazine, I had the memory, when I was a kid in my dad's TV repair shop, I was watching this movie called The Swamp Thing, which you might be familiar with because it sort of takes place out here in Louisiana. And so then I started collecting all these Swamp Thing comic books and action figure, and sort of starting to relate it to the Life magazine work. And for example, this comic book cover here, that layout started to look like that yearbook layout in the Life magazine. And quickly, if you don't know the story, it was basically a scientist working on a formula to end war hunger, and there was an accident, and he was his formula exploded and covered his body and it was burned and he fell into the swamp. And then days later, this creature emerged, this plant creature emerged and became known as the Swamp Thing. The story continues. So I did the opposite. I took the Life magazine original issue that I found on eBay and made a layout of the Swamp Thing cover. If I go back to this slide here. And then I did the same thing with the Swamp Thing book cover, the comic book itself. So those were all original, I think about 18 issue, and I spelled out the word life, which is really profound word. And of course, even the action figures dated back to the Vietnam War, for example, the Brian Jack, and the Swamp Thing himself. And of course, the weed killer is orange to signify Agent Orange. And if I go back to this picture here, I just want to just bring you back to this picture. So I appropriated the Life magazine from the portraits from the 1 Week's Dead, and I printed these pictures onto grass, thinking about, again, the memories of these soldiers who are now part of the landscape. So, of course, after the Vietnam War, after 1975, there was a great exodus of refugees, and these were known as the second wave, because the first wave are those who were the governmental official of South Vietnam. You might be familiar with the pictures of the helicopter on the building, being evacuated, and those folks went. But the rest of the people who didn't have any connection to government official or who weren't able to escape after the fall of Saigon, years later, from 1975 to almost 1990, or 1980s, 85, almost up to 1990, until 1993, when Clinton normalized relationship in Vietnam and they closed down all the refugee camps. So that waves are known as the second wave, and a lot of them are known as boat people because they travel on a boat. And so they're out there on the sea for days, sometimes weeks, floating, looking for a cargo to rescue them. And once they're rescued, they're taken to hopefully a refugee camp that could help them find asylum throughout the globe. So this is a project I did in 2003. I was heading into graduate school, and I want to go into graduate school with a body of work. So I heard about this island called Pulau Pidong, and it was the island where my family were staying for 9 months before finally getting accepted asylum here in the United States. So I found this photograph on the internet at that time, and then I asked my mom to come and join me on this trip because she was the one who had memories of this place. I was only a baby at the time. And we wouldn't, I didn't know what we were gonna find while we were out there. And so this is the actual dock that was in this photograph here. So we hired a fisherman to just take us out there. And we were so surprised of just the remnants of what was left on the island. So, and this is one of the pictures that I wanted to make of my mom holding this immigration documents that was issued by the U.S. Embassy that allow us entrance into the United States. So that was a picture I had in mind I want to create on the island. And then the rest of the photographs was just so surprising just to find, walk around. For example, this was, there was a whole community. When we arrived, we were the early group. There was just not, infrastructure wasn't really set up. And of course, when we left, a lot of buildings and programs, social programs, activities were created for the refugees. Like in this picture here, I was, it's very haunting to walk into this Catholic church where the Christ figure is falling off. You don't see that often. Usually Christ is on the cross. but through I guess wear and tear, or maybe somebody removed the Christ figure. But for me, even though I'm not Catholic, I wasn't raised in the Catholic household, but I understand the resurrection in ways and stuff. So there's like this new beginning kind of metaphor that's within this photograph. And there's also pictures like this where, there was these car posters, and then I was surprised to find, the symbolism for me too, like, you're not quite sure what future you're gonna have, the one with the car, successful Western sort of success, or one without it, And then while refugees were waiting for asylum, mythological stories and legends were created too. And one was about a spirit named Father Be Down who saved people. So he will drag, this statue will show him pulling people out of the ocean. And of course, family would dedicate plaques to him. And then surprisingly, we also found documents, these letters, testimony, governmental records. And we were so surprised to find these things. So my mom and I tried to collect as much as we could carry off the island. For example, we found like an ID card, which means this one here is an Indo-Chinese displaced person. I thought even having an ID that's telling you that you're displaced, makes you feel more secure in ways that you have paperwork, right? You have something you're carrying around with you. And then we also find like materials like this. This one is really sad. This is called a boat sheet. And what a boat sheet is, a document, a census of the number of people on a boat when the boat was rescued. So on this boat on November 3rd, 1986 at 3 a.m. in the morning, there was only one survivor, Chuan Chichang, and it was born in 1971, so it must have been like around 15 years old when the boat was found. And his occupation was a student. Because you can see here, somebody wrote on the paper, 22 people died 22 people died on the sea by tide. To be more correct, they died because of pirates. Because a lot of people were carrying their life saving with them, and because they were prone to being attacked by pirates. So I was very fascinated with these paperwork, and I was thinking about the information they contain, the letters, the words, the days, the numbers, and like for example here a wormy through stack of paper, and I wonder where did the information went, could it all just disappear? And then of course I used the chlorophyll printing process to illustrate that the information is within the landscape, the voices and the words of the boat people are within the land there. And then this is photographs, kind of part of the series here, but it's when I went to Vietnam in my first trip in 1999, my grandmother gave me this picture on your left there, a black and white photograph of my family in a studio backdrop. Photo set up here. And when I brought this picture back, I was looking at this picture and I was just thinking, wow, it looks so familiar. And then I realized there's another picture that looks very similar to it. And it was the one that was made of my family in San Jose, California when we, I think a couple of years after we arrived at the Japanese tea garden, we photographed ourselves, standing in this composition with a background that's very similar to the background and the fake background in the photograph of Vietnam. So I thought that was very uncanny. So then, in some other bodies of work, photographing Vietnamese American community, I just want to touch upon when I forgot what year was this, but I was invited by the Sheldon Museum of Art to photograph Vietnamese American community in like Nebraska, Lincoln, Nebraska, which is like middle of the map, it's like to find a Vietnamese American community was so fascinating for me, So I wanted to make a portrait project about the community. So I photographed them. I asked them to participate in the series here. And so the series is called Vietnam, Nebraska, as in there's this, this town called Vietnam, and it's just located in Nebraska. here. And for example, like in this picture here, I was just fascinated with this American craftsman house that has been converted into a Vietnamese Buddhist temple. And then I also participated with I collaborated with the student organization at the university there. And this is the sorority group, Sigma and Xi Zeta, setting up for their tongue-in-cheek title fundraiser called Invasion. It was just very hitting home to what we experienced in the last couple of years during the pandemic. And then this project here, actually, this is in Louisiana here, a project I did in 2017 for the Photo NOLA. I was invited by Photo NOLA and the Louisiana State Museum to develop a project with the Vietnamese American community. And when I went out to visit the community and do several research trips, I was so fascinated with gardens, the Vietnamese American gardens. And all of these gardens are like, they have a lot of like tropical plants, sometimes called invasive species brought into the location. So it's like, it's really kind of changed the ecology of this place, which I find myself is really, really fascinating. So this project is called Sunland, that's the Vietnamese pronunciation. But basically it's just playing around with the word, of course LA is an abbreviation for Louisiana, but the word Sunland means green leaves, and it's basically the word green, in Vietnamese, to say something is green, you have to attach the word leaf to it, because leaf are green. If you want to say something blue, you have to say, this word sun, and then the sky, so for the word blue. So anyway, these are some of my participants in their gardens. And this is a community gardens out there in East New Orleans. Here, and this garden was set up so these seniors can have an activity as they retire and also make an income for themselves. This couple here, run this amazing orchard in the back of their house. They just grow plants and they sell them. This is my aunt in Morgan City. So I was able to travel out there to photograph. I have some family members within the area here. And, a lot of Vietnamese people working within the fishing industry here in Morgan City. So moving on, this is another body of work. This is sort of a body of work that I've been working on for several years and ongoing. It's kind of photographing the national parks. And the work kind of started when I found this tintype of 3 Chinese men in a tintype studio, standing in front of a painted wooded backdrop. And I was thinking about like how the Asian body, or how any of our bodies fit within this landscape. So the story is a little bit long, but I was in Virginia for a while, doing a daguerreotype project of the southern landscape out there in Virginia. And when I came back to California, I was really fascinated with Yosemite Valley. And I thought, well, maybe I could actually photograph Yosemite Valley with the daguerreotype process. And as you all know, daguerreotypes were invented in 1839. It became the first practical form of photography. There's a new photographic profession. It's it's photography back in the day, And it's also a very unique process because it's a silver plate, and when you look at a daguerreotype, you see your own reflection. The viewer see themselves, so the viewer is also conscious of themselves looking at an object. And that's the fun thing I like about looking at daguerreotypes. It's so cool to see that. And then the other thing for me too is that a lot of 19th century daguerreotypes or portraiture. There are not many landscape work with the daguerreotype process, so I thought maybe I could fill that void. within the photo history realm. So I set out into the national park, and started to make daguerreotypes of these very iconic vista. A lot of these you recognize within the photographs by Ansel Adams or Carlton Watkins, Edward Muybridge, many photographers. And then one of the other unique thing about the daguerreotype process is also that it's also in reverse. So even though these are familiar vista, when they're reversed, as in the mirror image, they look familiar, but they also look a little strange because it's like that landscape, but it's like it looks a little bit off, in some ways. So I kind of like that unique quality. And of course, I could go on and on with the characteristic of the process. But it wasn't until later that I started to continue working on the process. And these are all Yosemite pictures here, that I realized there's something unique happening with the daguerreotype process. And the one thing that I didn't talk about right now, what's talking right now is a reflection, where the viewer can also see themselves. And in the 19th century, people called daguerreotypes mirror with memories, because it was a mirror that was held up to your face. In a camera, the viewer cannot see that, but it was literally a mirror, and as you look into the mirror, it remembers you. So they're always called mirrors remembering. I thought that was so beautiful. So in this case, these large daguerreotypes, the viewer will also become part of the picture. See themselves within these really important spaces. These are our national parks. One would say that there are, in the Europeans, they have their cathedrals, but we have our parks here, this space. And as I was researching this body of work, I was watching a lot of Ken Burns' National Park series, which just came out the year I was working on these. And in the series, the past Sierra Club president, Carl Pope, mentioned that a visit to the national park is the end of an immigrant experience. And I thought it was so beautiful. And I think the reason why we go to the park, because within that code too, it's like, it doesn't matter like how long you've been in the U.S., but we're always trying to find ways to root ourselves to the land, And of course, it's very complicated too, because the development of the national park was a way to push out the natives off their land. So something I still address in the work as I'm continuing making it. So this is just for process-wise, for those of you who are interested. The picture up there on the left corner is a Carlton Watkins darkroom sun kind of van. So of course, I don't have to have a horse and carriage. I have a minivan, and inside that is my laboratory. So I make these daguerreotypes in location on site and process them. And I'm very interested in historical side that deals with things of exclusion. And, this is here in Manzanar National Historical Site, where Japanese Americans were interned during World War II. And even a picture like this, it's profound for me, because this is a Joshua tree, but it's actually a boulder that fell off somewhere and got lodged into like a two other rock. It's almost this hand holding this boulder. It's like perfectly balanced. There's like this beauty of the national park that as United States as a country is trying to achieve this perfection, right, within our messy system we have, right? Our democracy itself, it is really messy, and it's still amazing that we're still here. We haven't fallen yet as other civilizations have. So later on, if you like, I could carry on the conversation more. There's a book signing, a new monograph that's just published, my first monograph here. It's okay, it's my only monograph too, because I feel like I'm really happy just to even have a something printed. And then lastly, I'll show you maybe a few more, and we'll open up to Q&A. This is a piece I did in 2020. During the Black Lives Matter movement and on the news. I was really thinking about photography itself, and I was asked to contribute a piece to a nonprofit auction. And I was looking at this Deborah Willis book called Reflection in Black, and I thought this book would be great as a daguerreotype. The cover itself has so much meaning in it. So this is an ongoing series I call On Photography, named after Susan Sontag, where I make daguerreotypes of objects that kind of, for me, represent that theme I call On Photography. So you can see myself reflected within this history of Black photographers. And then lastly, I'll just show you this one image because I know we're running a little low on time. This is, again, a daguerreotype. This piece is also created as a digital print for a nonprofit auction in San Francisco, another group called Photo Alliance, fundraising. But it's a photograph superimposed of a picture of my mother carrying my brother me. And the name of this piece is a mother and two brothers. And if you're really familiar with this landmark in Yosemite, this landmark is called Three Brothers. And it's named after, actually, the Mariposa War, where the three brothers of Chief Tenaya were captured. And so then this landmark was named after. So within even Yosemite, the valley itself, it's war. It was created after war. And at that time, of course, a lot of you know that the Civil War is happening, and the photographs that Carson Walken made found its way to Abraham Lincoln's desk. And Abraham Lincoln saw this picture and wanted to really assign some sort of message that, that this country can be held together by a national park, by a land that's beauty, like Yosemite Valley. So yeah, I'll stop here and take any questions if you have.